My name is James Gill. I'm one of the conveners of Energy West, as we it was trying to catalyze conversations around energy transition in the west of Ireland, mirroring some of the ones in Dublin in but trying to be inclusive, trying to use common the original Helix societies and not just with international climate, not the policy, but the inclusive across the board. So, I want to say thank you to all the advisors and have on boards in the last just a reminder of what Energy West is about. On the incentives we see, the right around the global meeting for clean energy. We know we have a lot of resources up on the west coast, on the mountains, along the offshore. So we're community innovation and policy aligned to create a fair, more sustainable future. So from Galway's Atlantic edge, we're building a place where the world comes to learn, to test, be inspired, a place rooted in local strength, and reaching toward global leadership. We start local, we grow together, and aim to lead by example. The mission that these advisors came together was to spark just and inclusive energy transition in the north of Ireland by amplifying local voices, shaping bold policy, and unlocking the region's power to lead clean energy innovation from the west to global landscape. So bring people together, ideas and influence to empower communities, strengthen strategic planning, and build energy resilience through insight, collaboration, and action. So you've seen these before, but I think it's useful to remind yourself of these every 6 months. So these are the values that we collectively came up with in that group of 10 advisors or so. They're on our website. I'm not going to go reading through all the small text, but it's there layered. So the first top 2 points of being purpose-driven for progress. So we want to act for long-term good of people, the West and planet. So I'm a scientist for lots of engineers, but there are sociologists on board, so we're evidence-driven with empathy. So we lead with science and listen with care. We want to do cathedral thinking and strategic doing, so again, not short-termism. We want to build for future generations and act with that as a focus. And the last of our values is, again, from West to World, really ramping up our sense of ambition and pride, rooted in the West of Ireland and ready for the rest of the world. And then lastly, our values, so inclusive by design, so everybody has a stake in the energy transition, and everybody has a say, and we've designed the group of advisors and each of our events to cover this kind of broad spectrum of inclusivity. So I've spoken for 5 minutes. We'll just have a few updates. So since we last spoke, we've got our website set up, we have a YouTube channel. The guys at the Porter Shed, Anthony at the back, and Nigel were released, and back as well, done a great job setting up this website and archiving and recording the proceedings. So we've got future events. The next one's likely in the end of April, possibly a visioning workshop. And the other things we need to cover is de-risking investment in energy infrastructure in the West. We want to have conversations with business leaders. We want to have conversations with financial venture capitalists who invest in energy in the West. And we also finally have set up an email, so hello@energywest. So, with all that said, you're all very welcome. Kate Billy Foster on show, good chief Queen of Air. I've given a brief introduction first. We have Dara and William from Aran, and he's going to talk to us about the long-term perspective of community action in Aran for 15 minutes. Then we have Arvan Sharkey, also from Aran, talking about the current projects in Aran and the future around community vision on Aran. We've got 2 colleagues from UC, friends. Evan Boyle is going to talk about collaborative research and community climate action in the Dingle Peninsula, which is an ongoing project for the last 5 years. And then Alexander Rao is going to talk about deliberative tools for sustainability, so talk about the process, community vision, and how to do that from a methodological point of view. We're going to have a conversation then for about 25 minutes, and then we're shaped in this year here intentionally to have a kind of open, frank town hall discussion, and then we'll wrap up by 5 o'clock. Some of us have ferries and buses and trains to catch, and children probably to pick up. So Dara, without further ado, I'll welcome you to the stage. Give Dara a warm welcome.
Just press the top, just stop, press that one, don't find the next one. And then you can be in front of the mic too.
You do, but you can take it off.
Oh, okay. That sounds better. Thanks very much. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Darren Lee is my name. I've lived on Inishmore since 1985, so that's 40 years. Before that, I lived in Dublin and in Dundalk. And in Dublin, I think all my life I've been involved in community development in some way or other. In Dublin, even while I was a student, I was involved in the youth club, and also involved in the community organisation at the time, the locality where I studied. Then I moved to Dundalk to become a teacher, but even outside of the school, I was working in with youth groups and adult groups in sort of community enlivenment or community activities. So, and then I moved to Aran, and pretty quickly from moving to Aran, I got involved in refounding the local development cooperative. We call it today the Corporate Cooperative. And I was director of that, one of the directors of that for 20 years, and the chairperson for a few of those years. And then I switched horses and got involved in founding the Energy Cooperative, which started in 2012 and is still going. And I'm still the chairperson of that, and I have Avril here, our full-time manager, to speak really in detail about what we're doing in the co-op. But I just want to use my 15 minutes to give an overview of community-based energy initiatives. So for me, I think one of the reasons I got involved in the energy co-op in Inishmore, it represents all 3 islands, by the way, not just Inishmore, and Sear. But one of the reasons I got involved was because I saw that the energy transition, this idea that there was a climate crisis, was not just a crisis that you had to deal with sort of reactionary, but it was something that you could take along with to progress and to improve people's lives, improve our lives, improve our island, perhaps create jobs. I saw it as a positive, if you like, rather than a negative. And from the word go in our energy co-op, we've been aiming at the positives that can come from the energy transition. And I think once you do that, you begin to see that there are so many opportunities now with the energy transition, especially for local communities. And of course, that's the other thing that I saw, which is that the government can do so much, industry can do so much, big corporations can do so much, but the change has to take place at ground level. It has to take place in everybody's home, in everybody's lifestyle, in everybody's way of living. And if we were to get local groups of people on board, you can have a group of passionate local people prepared to work voluntarily on an exciting vision. And that's what we've been trying to do on Aran, on the 3 islands, is stir up this idea of an exciting vision, that the energy transition, perhaps along with the biodiversity crisis, can be a silver bullet, which can be an engine of transformation of local communities, bringing them back to liveliness and people being interested in developing their own community and getting things done that makes life better for everybody, makes their homes warmer, their energy bills lower, their environment cleaner, like all these positive things, and even ultimately, creating jobs out of it locally. Because when you have an energy community living locally who see these possibilities, then within that community you can generate energy from the environment. Like the wind is there, the water is there, the earth is there, the sun is there, these four elements are in every part of Ireland, and communities can find a way to tap into those elements and create their own source of energy. And, I suppose one of the things that we saw in Aran when we started getting involved in the energy transition and we became an SEC, a Sustainable Energy Community, and we had our energy master plan on, we discovered, to our amazement, I certainly didn't know this, that there's an electricity cable coming from the mainland to the Aran Islands that has to travel underwater about 10 miles. And in the course of that journey, it loses half of the electricity, more than half of the electricity that it's sending out to us. And we don't pay that cost. The ESB has to pay that cost. But just the inefficiency of it, I discovered that all cables carrying energy lose it. And I learned that again when they were installing my 4 photovoltaic panels. And I didn't want them on my roof, I wanted them in my garden. And the installer said to me, well, we'll put them as near the house as possible because you lose some of the energy that the photovoltaic panels generate in sending that energy between the panels and the house. So even those cables, which are only a few meters long, are losing energy. So the principle has to apply then. The nearer the energy is generated to where you use it, the more efficient it is. So let's promote first and foremost people to generate energy in their own buildings, in their own homes. That's part of what we're doing, and I would like to see us in the future not just have solar PV on every roof on the 3 Aran Islands, which we're aiming towards, and there's a real possibility to get there, but also in the future to have a wind turbine on every house as well. So when the sun isn't shining, we have the wind. And if there are other possibilities as well, like if every house could make its own gas from a composter outside the back kitchen, wouldn't that be great too? Let's aim for as much self-sufficiency as we can get in every home. And then the next step is to make the community itself self-sufficient, to generate energy, which doesn't leave the community at all. So, number one, we're making the best use of the energy that we generate, because sending it out on cables, well, you lose half of it, especially if you send it from the Aran Islands out to the mainland. So let's use it ourselves. And let's own it ourselves. Let's not give the ownership to some big corporation that comes in and installs something and then takes most of the profits. Let's do it ourselves. Let's own it ourselves. Let's set up a company that will distribute the energy back to the islanders as needed. A microgrid. That's what we have in mind. And I think that vision can be something that's embraced by every community in the country. That's certainly what I'd like to see happen. Now, what have I not said in that slide? The nearer energy is generated to your home or your community, the cheaper it will be. I've said that. The community-owned energy cooperative, or SEC, can be the engine of community development and increased standard of living. I suppose that's another point I want to make, is that when you're working within a community, people may be put off if you use technical words like carbon emissions or energy transition or other words like that. The thing about it is, within these communities, it's better to talk about you have a more comfortable home, we'll get rid of all your drafts, we'll seal your windows, you'll have much less demand for fuel heating your home. The fuel that does heat your home will be clean, won't be putting out fumes like fossil fuels being used. And also, we as a community will have a pot of money coming in from the energy we generate, and we can use that money for anything we like within the community. So we can make all our environment cleaner and nicer, we can plant gardens, we can help kids go to college, we can help people who don't have the money to retrofit their own home, we can help them with that. We'll have a constant source of money. What community wouldn't be excited about that if you put it in those terms? Don't talk about carbon emissions, talk about more comfortable home, cheaper bills for energy, and a pot of money to improve your community. Those things will excite community. So that's the way I see forward. So the third point there, your community will be provided with a direct, secure and sustainable source of income and energy for the foreseeable future. Now we get on to, could the government support that? Well, back in 2015, We had a coalition government. We had Labour in partnership government, and we had Alex Weiss as the Minister for Labour. And he caught the vision, the one that certainly I share as well. He caught this idea that if you can harness the energy of voluntary groups in local communities, you will accelerate the energy transition. And he put all those ideas into his white paper, which is the energy policy that the government supposedly still has to this day. And in it you would see that he clearly outlines his vision, which would be my vision as well. Let me just, I can read this. This is out of his energy white paper. The transition, I can't read, it's easier here. The transition will see the energy system change from one that is almost exclusively government and utility-led to one where citizens and communities will increasingly be participants in renewable energy generation, distribution, and energy efficiency. Improved community engagement will be essential to renewable energy policy making and implementation. So clearly he saw local voluntary community groups as being central to being the engine of the energy transition. He came out to visit us on the Aran Islands. He featured our project and other community projects in his white paper, so he was totally on board. Since then, I think this particular issue has fallen down the agenda. As long as the Greens are in power, we have some sort of an engine within the government pushing the energy transition, but now we don't really have anybody, and it's fallen way down the agenda. So I think that's an issue that us here in Energy West can be lobbyists in favour of, to work towards that. Because we have discovered, I think, maybe Ireland will confirm this, that the government agencies will sit there and do very little unless they're pushed by the citizens of the country. And we learned that very early on. We were lobbyists with the SCAI from the word go when they started out their Better Energy Communities programme. We were one of the first groups to get involved in that. And we got to know some of the key people within the SCAI. We also were lobbying the government. That's how we got Alex White to come out and visit us while he was Minister for Energy. And since then, we have used the same approach in trying to get Galway County Council on board with us, and also with Delta on board with us. So rather than wait for these agencies to come to local communities, I think local communities need to get up and engage with their local authorities and get them on board. And we have found that once we did that, Galway County Council was delighted to work with us, and we're working on quite a number of bits and pieces, as Aran, I think, would illustrate. And also we're working quite well with the aspect of that. So there's a huge role for our local community groups to be lobbyists and to be the leads, if you like, in the envisioning of what can be done, and then seeking the support of government agencies to bring those things about. I'm nearly my 15 minutes really up there. I'm on my last slide. Good. So there are a few key things which haven't yet happened, but which need to happen if this vision for community groups to be the engine of the energy transition is really to take off. It hasn't really. I mean, we have over 1,000 sustainable energy community groups now registered with the SCAI, and that means that they're all either have had an energy plan put together, an energy master plan put together, or they're in the process of doing it. And the SCAI funds that, so they end up with this big document in their hand, showing them what is possible to do within their community and what maybe they would like to do within their community. But the next stage is how do you get out there and do it? And I think very few SECs have managed to get much further than their master plan. And one of the problems is if you have, for example, in your master plan an idea that a community-owned solar farm could be installed in your community area somewhere. But a huge amount of work has to go into that, for getting the land, raising money, and lots of other things. And how do you do that with a group of volunteers who want to maybe have a 40-hour week or their own business or their own work to do? And you can't really. Like, community groups need the funding to employ staff. We were looking at Aran in that we just at the right time got involved in European research programs, where we were able to become partners with other groups throughout Europe in research projects, and that brought us in enough money to employ people, and that's really what we're living off. But if the community groups don't have that, how can they get going? How can they even register themselves as a sort of, let's say, an energy cooperative or a company of some kind, because then they need to have their accounts audited once a year, then they have lots of other expenses. Where does that money come from? So my proposal, and I know some proposal many people in this whole area, because we've had lots of meetings about it and emails about it and discussions about it, is that SECs, in order to take the next step in energy transitions in their local community, need core funding. So that's a key proposal that I would make there. Yeah, the second one down. The first one there is a proposal which I'm very happy to see has come out in the latest report of the NESC, National Economic and Social Council. They have just issued a new report, and they say quite a bit about the need for community engagement and involvement. And one of their ideas that they're pushing, and I would certainly agree with it, is that areas throughout the country have a place that's designated as a green energy industrial park. And immediately I thought of Russellville. Russellville has already really been designated as that by ULOT, so that could be a good example of what's in mind. But the idea would be that a certain amount of space, a few hectares, may be set aside in which all types of clean energy initiatives could be done there. Like out in Russellville, we see the possibility of doing something with hydrogen there, because we could generate hydrogen there, and it could be used by the ferries and by the fishing boats as an alternative fuel. But I would like to see in every locality, I'd like to see even on the Aran Islands, that in our county development plan, you know, the way the county development plan designates certain areas for housing, certain areas for industrial development, I would like in the county development plans that they also designate a certain area in every region that would be for a green energy industrial park. If we had that on the islands, a lot of the difficulties we've had about putting wind turbines or a solar farm would be east first, because the location would be already designated for something like that. So that's that one. Then the third one down is microgrids. I've already said that our vision is that we will eventually own our own energy source as a community, find a way to store it on the 3 islands, and then sell it back to the community as it's needed, become sort of a local supplier, a local utility. But to do that, certain legislation needs to be passed. It's already been passed in Europe. There's already microgrids all over Europe in action, people doing exactly that. And it hasn't happened here because the government is yet to enact the legislation. However, I heard somebody say recently that that might take another 3 years for that to happen. Like, this is just far too slow. Like, as I say over here on the left, climate change is an emergency, and it's an emergency throughout the world, and we need to act with that in mind and do things much quicker than we're doing at the moment. So that would be another thing to lobby for. We need to get the government to move much quicker on all of these issues than it's doing at the moment. The ESB, also in Ireland, is very slow to engage with local communities, and we have tried to engage with them on various European projects. And because they have said no, it means we've dropped out as well, because the project can't go ahead without a local GSO to be involved. So that's holding the whole thing back, especially around microgrids, because that's an area we want to work on. So the ESB need to get their finger out as well and get on board. And then the final one there is this ambition we all have for offshore wind on the west coast of Ireland. Again, very, very slow in happening, frustratingly slow. And at the moment, the government has no plans to involve local coastal communities in those offshore wind, which is, to me, a terrible mistake. It's not sufficient for us just to have a community benefit fund. That to me is like throwing sweets to the children. It's not sufficient. Sure, certainly we should have a community benefit fund. We most certainly should benefit from whatever happens out in the offshore wind area. But also, we would like to have involvement in those projects, like by, for example, owning shares or part ownership in the project. And we'd like to feel that those projects going on off our shores are ours, as well as belong to bigger corporations as well. But then partly they're ours, but we're involved. And the government just seems to have yet to learn its lesson that it doesn't really work if you don't be involved in the local community at a level at which they're comfortable and happy to be involved. We certainly want that. Anything that goes off our shores in the Aran Islands, we want to be involved from the word go. We want to have input in the decision making. We want to have a share in the ownership in some way and a share in the benefits that come from it. That's all I have to say. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Aran. I have a long list of questions for the conversation on, and my apologies for giving you such a poor introduction. I'm a little bit frustrated getting going. So, Avril is our next speaker. Avril is a native of Aran Islands, of West Coast of Galway. She's the manager of Seafoot, which is a community-owned energy cooperative that I was just talking about, representing the 3 Aran Islands. Avril leads the community-based renewable energy and sustainability initiatives that empower islanders to take control of their own energy. Her work focuses on developing local renewable energy generation, including reliance on fossil fuels, reducing reliance on fossil fuels, and ensuring that social and economic benefits of the energy transition remain within the community. This includes supporting local employment, which I think is a key outcome that Aran achieved that others have not. Strengthening population sustainability and protecting the cultural heritage of the Aran Islands. Under Avril's stewardship, the cooperative has become a recognised model of bottom-up climate and energy action, and we have lots of academics who are wanting to visit you. It's actively involved in innovative projects ranging from home retrofits and electrification to digital microgrids, demonstrating how small island communities can use the transition to clean, resilient energy systems. Avril, the floor is yours. Please welcome Avril.
Hello everybody, how are you? So my name is Aran Harkey, and you've heard all about the corporate movement along the Aran Islands Energy Cooperative from our chairperson and my boss. So Dara, I suppose, has given a little bit or a lot of information on, I suppose, the why the Energy Cooperative was established and what our vision is and what we're hoping to achieve. And I'm going to try and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing at the moment to achieve those goals, and I probably won't be able to cover all of it, but I'll try my best to touch on all the various different topics that we're working on. So Dara did touch a little bit on this, but I feel it's really, really important. So in 2022, kind of the 10-year anniversary of the Energy Co-op, we sat down and we looked at our aims and objectives. And there wasn't really a huge amount that we wanted to change there, but we did feel that there was a need for us to reframe maybe how we were putting it together. So I don't know if these really all understand, but I've summarised it. Yeah, I've summarised it into I suppose 5 common goals of our community. And so it doesn't really focus necessarily on renewable energy or decarbonisation, but the same goals that everybody in the community, no matter what you're working in or what you're involved in, we all want the same things. So those things are a sustainable economy. Generating your own renewable energy is a way that we can help to achieve that goal. Preserving the language and culture of the islands. We're really, really lucky that we live in an area that's so rich in heritage and in culture. But if there aren't people living and working and prospering on the islands, we lose a lot of that as well. So again, we see the energy transition as a big opportunity as well as a huge challenge for community groups like ours. Environmental protection. So at this stage we included, even though it was always something, and I think a kind of action, you can't just look at energy, you have to look at climate and biodiversity as well along with that. But this is when we decided to actually put it in writing that it was part of our legal objectives. So protecting and enhancing the unique biodiversity we have on the islands. And sometimes it's really difficult to balance those two things, the want to generate your own renewable energy and also preserving the biodiversity and the unique landscape that we have. And so we need to try very carefully on that. From a planning commission perspective, it's really challenging. Sustainable living, so promoting energy efficiency and clean energy use on the islands, also reducing waste, making it a nicer, more comfortable, cleaner place to live. And to be lighthouse communities, so sharing the lessons that we've learned, learning from other communities too, and sharing as much of the hard lessons and the information that we've gathered along the way with other groups. And I think that was our way out. Our actual legal objectives and those 5 goals are in long form on our website, but this is my way of kind of summarising them all into a couple of different lines. And I feel that it helps to remind us why we're doing what we're doing along the way as well. So to how we do it, I suppose we've done the Energy Master Plan, which Darren talked about there, where it was quite eye-opening in terms of transmission losses and things like that on the subsea cable to the islands, and compounded for us the need to generate energy locally and that it makes sense from everybody's perspective. We've also written a clean energy transition agenda with the Clean Energy for EU Islands Secretariat. We've got a joint commitment from stakeholders on the islands for the Clean Energy for EU Islands Secretariat initiative again, where we've signed up to this joint commitment that we all want to achieve these goals. And as Jane mentioned, we have hosted and would love to continue hosting students and researchers on the islands and with the Energy Co-op, because we're able to get them to, I suppose, help us address or find solutions to the unique challenges that we have. Darren mentioned our EU research projects in his presentation, and I suppose that is what has really transformed the Energy Co-op and allowed us to employ staff. So at the moment we have 4 staff, we have 2 full-time and 2 part-time people working for the Energy Co-op on all of our various different projects. At the moment we have 2 research projects, or European research projects, which are quite similar, Odin and data setting. They're similar in quite a lot of ways, but I suppose one of the things that we're doing is building a digital twin of the island, which will allow us then to plan from an energy perspective, what projects do and don't make sense, what effect it would have on our local grid, for example, if every house changed to heat pump, if every house installed solar, so we have a better understanding ourselves, because it's really difficult as a community. We can't just ring up ESB and say, what would this do to the grid? Because we don't have any other way of understanding it. So while our European research projects is what funds us and funds our work, we have a big challenge of trying to identify things that we want to do and then identify a suitable project or a suitable partner to apply for it, and we're not always successful. So more of those are turned down than actually go ahead. And so there's a huge amount of work just in that, and that's where the co-funding that Darren mentioned, in order to employ people and have a little bit of, I suppose, certainty, would be really, really helpful, not just for ourselves, but to all groups in this area doing this kind of work. Because we spent a huge amount of time trying to, worry about next year and the following year, and I'm sure lots of other groups do too. We're also currently involved in the Clean Energy for EU Islands 30 for 2030, 30 renewable islands by 2030 initiative. And that, I suppose, is what's really taking the lead at the moment on our community solar farm development. So we have, it doesn't bring in funding to us, but it does give us access to a huge range of expertise. The 30 for 30 team are doing an awful lot of work on our behalf, from various reports on how to best retrofit traditional building before the SEI's traditional pilot kicked off, to looking at environmental and financial modelling for a solar farm, helping us identify sites. And we're working with the local authority, with the council and the Dingle, so they look at on that project too. So it's bringing everybody together to help work on those projects. And that's ongoing, but of course these projects are slow, they don't happen overnight. Another project that we're really proud of is the LEAP project. So LEAP is a new life funded project, and as part of that we have established a new energy agency for Galway. And so GFI is the University of Linear, the Western Energy Agency. And this group not only, I suppose, facilitate home retrofitting and project manage it if needs be, or give the information to manage it yourself, if that's what you choose. But they also offer free independent advice to homeowners, so they're not just taking a contractor's word for what they should do or that this will be best for their home. They're getting free independent advice. Somebody who actually comes survey their home, they don't get a BER cert for free, but they do get some expert to come and visit their home and give them advice specific to their circumstances. And in my opinion, that's an invaluable service to be able to offer to people in order to assure that we have a just transition. We need to be able to ensure that people who maybe can't afford that expertise have access to it. And that's one thing that I'm very, very proud of. So the Cornwall Company, the Energy Co-op, has established an energy agency. It is independent of us. I'm the chairperson, and Dara is also represented on the board along with other people as well. But that we've seen huge success. We've seen an awful lot of people engaged with that. They don't always have the means to act immediately in retrofit their home, but I believe it has a huge impact on assisting people in the Gaeltacht region in particular. I suppose where the funding was focused, but in reality it's working all over Galway. And that's a further 3 jobs that have been created in this space by the Energy Co-op. Another example of a project, an ongoing project that somebody in this room is very, very familiar with, is the PV Mel. So we are now facing into our 5th round of a PV Mel on the Aran Islands, and got a huge amount of support from Colin Garvey, who at the time worked in the Aran Islands Energy Cooperative, to develop this project on the islands. And one of the things I loved the most about it was seeing how maybe people who didn't understand the technology, or didn't understand if it was right for them or not, and maybe didn't even understand enough to ask the questions to find out, were able to learn from listening to other people. So instead of just contractors going to individual homes, by bringing all of those people together, you learn a lot from the questions other people ask, and get a much better understanding. So Colin very kindly gave up his time and came out to Aran a couple of times to deliver presentations on what the technology is. And it's been really, really successful. One of the big challenges, I suppose, for us, and one thing that we do recognise, is that not everybody is in a position to install PV panels on their home, and it is a luxury to be able to generate your own electricity at the moment, because at the end of the day, all grants aside and VAT relief and everything else, there's still a significant investment there for people. And so we are actively working on a way that we can maybe tackle some of the homes that are in fuel poverty or just don't have the disposable income to install these systems. Because really I feel it's those people that may need the solar panels the most, who might lower their energy costs, lower their bills, that don't have the disposable income to pay for that energy upfront, which is essentially what you're doing when you're purchasing a PV system. But there's a lot of work, I suppose, behind the scenes that goes into gathering those household, the names of the lists of people that want to have the systems installed, having the meetings, looking at the pricing that comes back, having a look to see what the payback will be. Not that that's necessarily the most important thing, but that's a lot of the work that we do as well. We're also working very closely with Galway County Council. The 3 Aran Islands are the Galway County's dedicated decarbonisation zone. So we are working very closely with Rebecca and with a lot of our colleagues in the council on that project, and we've, I suppose, made some funding applications and been able to, retrofit community building, put solar panels on community building. We've done tree planting, because again, I suppose it's not just energy focused work, water stations, trying to reduce waste. But most recently, I suppose, we've been able to secure funding for home energy assessments from a local authority, and that subsidises home energy assessments for households on the Aran Islands down to as little as €50. So they would get a detailed BER cert advisory report and so on, but also a home energy assessment report that would give, it's essentially a roadmap for retrofitting your house, whether you want to do a deep retrofit and do everything at once, whether you want to apply for individual grants and build on it year on year. It gives you, again, independent advice. It's not listening to a contractor saying these are the things that you need to do that would work best for you. And that's been really, really successful. And so that's, I suppose, phase 1 of our work in that regard. So the main reason that we chose to do home energy assessments or to apply for funding for those was that we had a community workshop and we asked people what their biggest priority was. And it wasn't a solar flare, it was retrofitting their homes, reducing their own energy use, making their homes more comfortable. And so that's what inspired us, I suppose, to make a funding application how do we help people get that work done? And the first thing is the information and understanding what it is that you need to do. And we're hopeful that after the home energy assessments have all been completed, we're looking at upwards of 60 or 70 homes and having home energy assessment completed on the 3 islands, that we'll then be able to begin retrofit methods. So a very similar idea to the solar method that I suppose is happening all over the country now, where groups of people are coming together to get one job done. So whether it's attic installation or cavity wall installation, we're looking to aggregate all the homes and try and get better prices for people. And again, help people learn from one another the pros and cons of what they're looking to do to their homes. So that's an ongoing thing. It's not necessarily energy related, but I wanted to touch on this because it is a big focus of our work at the moment, is working on biodiversity projects. We were really lucky on the island a couple of years ago that a coral crake that hadn't been heard or seen on the island for decades decided to visit us, and that inspired us to work with local ecologists and have a coral crake habitat action plan put together. We also work on some other projects, and again, this really helps with community engagement. We find that I find anyway, that the likes of developing a community-owned solar farm is a really slow project. It doesn't move very quickly, there aren't regular updates to give, and you need to, I feel that we need to maybe get better at it. We need to continue to ensure that we're engaging in smaller projects with our community too, in order to keep that momentum going and to keep that engagement with us, and to make sure that we still know where the community are in terms of what they're looking for and what they want to do. And so we run gardening for biodiversity workshops. We planted over 300 trees last year on Inishmore. We've worked with breeding waders. We've just secured funding to do to implement our concrete habitat action plan and work with local farmers and be able to pay them to undertake actions to hopefully encourage the concrete, but which would ultimately improve the biodiversity of the island and improve it for lots of other species, not just the concrete as well. Another example of some smaller initiatives, and these are kind of, I suppose, quick wins. There's a fair amount of effort involved in them, but they're more tangible things that people can see us doing all the time. So we have a Keep Up campaign, which is most businesses across all 3 Aran Islands jumped at the chance to get on board, where people get a discount essentially if they use a Keep Up. And that's, like I said, all across all 3 Aran Islands. And these are 2 other events that are coming up very soon. So the first one is understanding climate change. And I suppose I feel that I attend meetings all the time, I'm doing workshops all the time, and I'm learning all the time, because I don't have a technical background at all. But a lot of people are really intimidated by how the language used around climate change, or maybe feel like they can't participate, or if they go to a meeting it all goes over their head, they don't know what's going on. We need to be really conscious of the language that we use and how we engage with people and communicate with people. And so we've invited Jacinta Barnes out, who's at the moment going around the country delivering workshops to primarily the over 55s, but just about making climate change relatable, making sure that people actually understand what their relationship is with climate change, how it relates to them, and really simplifying it and just demystifying the whole thing. And so we're really looking forward to her doing a workshop on each of the islands in the coming weeks. We've also got a PVT, so this is kind of kicking off our 5th round of PV Metal. And this is just a really, really informal meeting. There's no presentations, there's no contractors, there's no experts. We've invited some people who already have installed solar PV for tea and cake, and just a chance to bring people who are looking at getting that equipment installed in their own home to ask questions about how it's worked for them, how do they find the installation process, any cons, how are you finding it since 2 years on, how is it working for you? And just giving people the opportunity to do that. There won't be a presentation, I won't be speaking to anybody, it's literally just going to be tea and cake and chats, and I'm really, really looking forward to it. And I know that they're not huge projects, but the reality is that in the day-to-day and engaging with the community, these are the small projects that we're doing all the time, while the other bigger ones are running in the background. And when it comes to, I suppose, future vision, Dara, I've seen Dara's slides already, so I know that he was giving a huge amount of information on what we're looking to do and achieve. But I suppose just to summarise in my own head at the minute, community scale generation and storage, I think would be transformational. Having that community pot of money to subsidising retrofits or scholarships for students or whatever it might be, it would be completely up to the community. That would be transformational for our community. More retrofitting, subsidising the retrofitting ideally if possible, and distributed PV for all, ensuring that everybody is able to participate, that it's not just those with disposable income that can do it. Creating a smart community grid on all of the islands. So again, our new research projects that are involved in digital twin creation and installing monitoring equipment and everything. This will hopefully allow us to share energy with one another, provided that the government transposes the EU directives, but it's very, very slow. And again, that's one of the things that is completely outside of our control, and we're doing our best to be ready for it when it is possible. Decarbonising transport on the islands, which is always a big part of our vision. And we're also loads of other smaller events like circular economy events and repair hubs and things like that. And so that's some of the work that we're doing. And I think I'm going to leave it there for everybody. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's amazing. Before the conversation goes on. So we've had Dara and Margot talking about doing from a community perspective. And the next two speakers are coming from the understanding the doing or understanding the process, if that's fair to say. They not agree with that. So the next speaker is Evan Boyle. He's a senior postdoctoral researcher in the Sustainability Institute in UCC down in Cork. He's from Hull-Benton. His research focuses on community engagement in the energy transitions, collaborative approaches to sustainability, and city and university partnerships for climate action. Previously, he has done research on public participation in renewable infrastructure development, both Ireland and internationally, collaborating with Airgrid through the STEPS project from 2022 to 2024, and Just Transition Systems of City-level climate action through Just Cities Hub. As of 2025, he's now a PI in Urban Climate Collab, exploring city-university collaborations for climate action from now to 2029. Other current research interests include transdisciplinary methodologies, blue spaces, and nature immersion, and luminality, and ritual festivals. He's a member of the Sociological Association of Ireland and a working group leader for the Cost Action Charter. He is co-founder for the mission Restore Our Ocean and Waters Charter Action Blue Connections, and a multidisciplinary conference and consortium exploring society's connections to the ocean. Evan is on the editorial board for the journal Societal Impacts. He's commissioner on Ireland's Transition Commission, with secretarial functions provided through the Department of Climate, Energy, Environment and Government of Ireland. We worked put this 3 hours of reading.
I know, yeah.
It's quite a job to go in.
Thanks. I thought the bio was for these saints, not to be read out. My mistake. I have to avoid that in future. But it's all this. So yeah, I think my name's Evan Boyle. I'm from University College Cork. I won't go through the bio again. It's a nice opportunity to come and speak, and it was nice for James to ask myself and Alex. And that it kind of goes back. I'm going to talk about a project that we were involved with in Marai. We took, probably for the first time, a more collaborative approach with a live project. But from a research perspective, our thinking around our interest in doing that emanated from a project in 2016, 2017 that colleague James and myself, Claire Watson, was involved with, where we were looking at some of the most developed community energy initiatives around Ireland. And Dara in the Aran Islands in your team was one of those projects, and from that we became interested in kind of partnering more actively with a research project or with a community energy project, and seeing the potential to work more collaboratively rather than at a more detached objective perspective. So yeah, it's a nice time to kind of discuss some of that, and it's kind of full circle in a way. Yeah, I'm going to touch on the experience of doing research in this way, and I think you spoke to it too, like the importance that research ends up having for groups in their functioning, which we would be critical of. Obviously, from a research perspective, it's great, but from a functioning of how community projects should be run, it's maybe not ideal. So maybe some reflections on that. but also to learn from, because it's all context specific, like Dingle is a very specific place with specific things about it and specific people based there. And for Energy West, that will be the same, that there's certain characteristics or certain things to capitalize on. Things to prioritize. So I think that's important to kind of consider in this community visioning kind of piece as well. Thinking about the characteristics of where projects such as this are based, and then also what are the strengths of the local assets. And those assets can be, social business, whole range of things, natural assets, and so on. So to kind of think about different projects in that way, and through Dingle, it was a successful project, and that was great. And, it's discussed in different conversations often. So that, that's a good thing, but also that it's locally specific, and then within that there's some serendipitous circumstances that lead these things to be successful. And in thinking about the community visioning side of it, that's important in so much as thinking about what you're setting out to achieve. And Dara, you touched on it, and I think James at the start you mentioned as well. I think the theme of community visioning is interesting in energy, like what we found in Dingle, and I'll move on to some of the slides. What we had here was a partnership across 4 organizations. The Dingle Hub, which was a local not-for-profit set up around the idea of bringing sustainable employment opportunities, and had a remote working hub, so kind of some similarities of what's going on here as well. MARI, ourselves as a research institute based at UCC, ESB Networks, who are obviously distribution system operator, and NewKid, who are a community development organization based on Peninsula. Now, ESB Networks had their own project, the Dingle project, where they were looking at trialing different technologies. The Peninsula provides a nice place to kind of cut off the distribution system, trialing technologies, and see the impact that's had on the grid. So they already had an idea around the project, and then discussions amongst the other partners kind of came about to see could we look at doing something bigger. And it's to that piece of the visioning, the community visioning, the kind of theme of what we're discussing today, around the vision for Dingle Peninsula 2030 wasn't to do with energy, and it wasn't to do even with climate action or climate change or anything like that. It was around sustainability in the peninsula, particularly around the employment base and how to keep people there. There's a brain drain. Different places suffer from this challenge where young people would leave the peninsula. They wouldn't see any long-term viability of moving back there. They'd move to Dublin, or they'd move to London, or they'd move to Galway or Cork or wherever, and they wouldn't see a viable way to move back into their professional careers. Also, the peninsula is very reliant on tourism, which is seasonal, so they have that challenge. Also, these conversations are taking place in 2017, so the context of that time is important as well, around some of the discussions and what would be possible. But yeah, what comes out is this idea of a sustainable peninsula where people can have good quality long-term jobs and stay in the area. People can bring their kids up here, their kids can then stay here and have good quality jobs in the peninsula as well. So it's not around an energy transition, or it's not around taking climate action. It's a specific and local goal that's specific to the local characteristics of the place. But the conversations we began to have in working towards this vision were, what are the kind of macro trends we can look at where sustainable employment potential will exist, and then situating those as digitalization and decarbonization. So if those are the priority areas, the jobs will come. They're the areas we focus our energy for projects on. The hope would be that jobs will come about through that kind of strategic prioritization of those areas. In terms of what ESB Networks were interested in, they led an ambassador project where they selected 5 ambassadors on the peninsula to trial new technologies, solar panels, EVs, heat pumps, and to discuss their experience in the community, and to see the impact it would have at the domestic level to the grid. From a research perspective, we partnered with ESB on this and followed the ambassadors through that process. So we met with them every few months to see the experience of taking on different technologies at different times. So it's kind of a step-by-step process, first time in the retrofit, and then the smart meters were quite late, which created a challenge in how people interacted with it. So there's always, challenges from a research perspective. That's a challenge. The world happens at a pace that you might not plan for. So some of the level of interaction with the data that the ambassadors have, we were gone by the time that was kind of relevant. But this was ESB's kind of core function as part of their involvement on the Dingle Peninsula at the time. But we had this wider partnership, and the wider partnership was around exploring what this would lead to, having this initial ambassador program, and what we termed this as was the diffusion of sustainability. So it's back to the same point. This is kind of how things spread and what happened next. It's to the same point around the community visioning, but coming at it from the opposite side. So the community visioning piece kind of suggested employment as a key area to kind of prioritize for sustainability, sustainable employment base. And also when ESB Networks led these energy projects and we started to have some traction as Dingle Peninsula 2030, what we saw emerge was people beginning to have some trust in, okay, what's going on there, who are people who are collaborating on that work, and then approaching us with their own ideas. And all of a sudden we start to have farmers who are interested in certain topics, or people looking at things in transport and stuff in the secondary school. So a whole range of different initiatives start to emerge once we kind of begin showing success or having an impact on the peninsula. And it was quite visible what ESB Networks were doing, and then in partnership with the wider Dingle Peninsula 2030 project, we had kind of outreach days and partnered with local events that were taking place on the peninsula, set up desks and be able to talk to people and raise awareness about what we were doing. And from that, more people would come in, begin to see some level of kind of interest in what was going on, and also seeing it as an opportunity to partner with Dingle Peninsula 2030 to pursue their own kind of interests or ideas. It's kind of a key part of the learnings from our perspective is around the collaboration. It was a step into a new means through which to do research, which came with risk, definitely from our perspective. In terms of building a partnership in which you all can collaborate effectively, that's a time commitment that is often outside the standard research design kind of framework. So that was something we had to work on and maybe go beyond the normal expectations on your time commitments, I suppose, to make sure that works. The piece at the start when we were talking about the vision that we all agreed upon, that wasn't something that we just walked into a room and said, okay, that's what we want to do. And that was something that was continually kind of negotiated through the process. We all had our own objectives. The objectives of a local community development organization are so different than ESB Networks objectives. So how do you manage that continuously was quite important. And as the research organization, we kind of ended up having a role in that space, in making sure we had weekly meetings, having the agendas, keeping everything kind of ticking along. And it's to the point that you raise around where the supports lie, in the absence of those core supports. We kind of picked up some of that slack, I suppose. Also, the power dynamics are important to reflect upon in collaboration. Two of the partners are very locally based in Dingle. One is national, one is Cork. So that creates challenges too, or even the perception of people's role within projects is important to consider. It was important for us to manage, and it was a delicate thing to balance throughout it. I think most importantly was that last one around the different skills, collectively, and it's just an obvious thing, but by working together, we immediately had so much of a wider potential for impact. A local farmer would come to with an idea. There was a local guy. He's interested. Yeah. Yeah. But he's interested in the potential of solar and bringing in farmers, dairy farmers. There's 120 dairy farmers. Bringing in dairy farmers and thinking about potential for solar. It's a hard conversation. We could not have that conversation with 100 dairy farmers on the Dingle Peninsula. No way. Whereas he was the local AI man. He knew all these people, so we could have the discussion in a way that made sense to them and socialize the idea of different energy sources for farmers on the peninsula. Now, what we could do for him is, we have a link to a whole range of researchers interested in different topics, or there was to the departmental level. We have a relationship with the national level, with SEI, or wherever it is. There's different networks, and we could both benefit from each other. And through the collaboration, I think that was the key. reason why there was success across what we were seeking to do. We just have some of the legacy in terms of some of the SECs, because I know you mentioned the SEC network as kind of a piece of it. There was 3 set up, the 2 on the right-hand side are perhaps more interesting. The West Kerry Dairy Farm Sustainable Energy Community is one that I mentioned, which Dinny kind of led the establishment of. And then the one on the far right is the Tourism and Hospitality Sustainable Energy Community. The reason these are interesting is because they're back to that point around community visioning and making it very locally specific. So the sustainability, just the tourism and hospitality is very relevant locally, where there's a lot of heat loss, you have B&Bs, you have pubs, and people came together and were like, oh, maybe something can be done here. Some of the numbers were crunched, and it was a huge opportunity for businesses. So immediately it was like, okay, let's do this. But that's not to say that should be the national policy that everyone should do a tourism and hospitality SEC. But what is local might be specific, and that specific thing might end up leading to something like an SEC or some other opportunity to advance it. Similarly to your own situation on the islands, like that's very unique, specific characteristics there. And for project with Energy West, there'll be similar differences, but a similar approach to thinking about what those unique things are. I just wanted to touch on the piece down the bottom right, which was we created these kind of learning briefs as documents to kind of carry us through. So we had to do academic papers, which, in general, people don't want to read. If that's not the world they're in, that's fair enough. And it's specific language, and it can be kind of lost, particularly in the local context. So we made a point of, with every output we had, we kind of communicated as a learning brief, which is short, it can be 5, 2 or 4 page document, which kind of summarized what we were doing. So we kind of carried them through the whole project, and they're actually really valuable for a number of reasons. One, locally, people could pick them up and be like, oh, that's what those 2 guys from Cork have been doing, So it was a way for people to see what was going on, but also it helped with the kind of reporting of what we were doing. So we could go to people and, share them up in Dublin. If we were meeting with policymakers, it's much easier to share something like that than to share an academic paper. And then also, this isn't to say how great the project was in terms of the awards and stuff, but there was success. But a lot of the success is because we were effectively reporting on what we were doing all the time. And it's back to the point of the need for capacity to do that work. There's great work going on in community projects all around the country, but they're busy doing the work. So their ability to capture how much work they're doing is limited, and they don't have the ability to report to these sorts of opportunities and things when they happen. Our collaboration on the project ended in 2022, but there's still ongoing work that has emanated out from that. On the top line, it's research which Alex and myself are involved with. And we've kind of moved from the rural to the urban, and we're doing more projects at the city level in Cork, Urban Climate Collab and Just Cities Hub. The SEPS project there on the right is a partnership with TSO, Airgrid, around their public engagement, so less so engaged research and more so research looking at engagement processes. But at the bottom, more interestingly, this is ongoing work that UCC is partnering with Dingle on. So this kind of capacity for partnering on research projects was established through our initial Dingle Peninsula 2030 initiative, and that can be tapped into now. Like often people will email myself or other colleagues and say, oh, I have a research idea, and just creates a system that can continue. Whether that's the right system long term, I don't know, but it is a system that can be effective to explore different projects in relation to biochemicals and biomethane, energy participation through apps and stuff. And then also there's stuff on anaerobic digestion as well. Just some lessons learned, which is really kind of high level things around co-production of solutions-based time, patience, understanding. So there's a need to really commit to these sorts of partnerships and allow the time for them to be successful. From our perspective as a research organization, this was something which we haven't done since the same yet. Because of the challenge, but we do have the legacy of what it led to. So we can tap other projects in more easily, but not with the same integration we're engaging every week of the year for the first 18 or so months. I think the key point around visioning is climate action should be seen as complementary to community development and vice versa. You had touched on that as well. I think that's how we should all be seeing this, climate action as a vehicle to future communities rather than do climate action communities, because some people don't want to respond to that language and don't see them that way. That's fair enough as well. And then, so there's still a limit in terms of core funding. It emphasizes a lot of the points that he raised as well. So there's a lot of similarities, so it's quite nice. It's kind of a full circle thing. But no, I'll finish there. I just had a few final barriers, but we might just finish there. Thanks. I see the 3 minutes. I said, okay, I'm out of here.
Thanks for
Thanks.
lots to follow up on.
So can I get a question? Will we get the slides?
On the website.
Okay.
This is why I kind of want to just jump straight to questions, but I have to hold off on the reins. So our final speaker is another colleague from UCC, Alexandra Revage. Alexandra is a research fellow in UCC down in Cork. She's a vice chair of the cross-action SHIFT, which is Social Science and Humanities for Transformation and Climate Resilience. She has a PhD from University of Galway in geography, and her research work has concentrated on diverse areas, including societal and policy aspects of climate action, disaster risk management, and promoting the role of social sciences and humanities and transdisciplinarity with climate research. Alexandra is also a member of the International Energy Agency's USER TCP, which is a program on empowering all. I met Alexandra 10 years ago when we dived in deep in this Imagining 2050 project, and then grew to the other project. So it's great to welcome you to Galway. Thanks so much.
No, it's right like that, yeah. So, hi everybody. Don't let the UCC stuff fool you because, you know, Galway is really my adopted county. I actually live in Galway. Thankfully, to remote working, you know, I can do a lot of my work from home. And, you know, I've been living in County Galway for the last 25 years, originally Portuguese. So just moving on in terms of the work here today, I'm going to look at some deliberative tools for sustainability, and this is part of the Imagining 2050 project that James was talking about, and we've had some experience in terms of how you engage with people, you know, the sort of the value of particular processes, in particular deliberative participation. I don't know if others in the room, I feel we've been talking about deliberative democracy for the last 10 years. Feels a little bit repetitive at times. I don't know if other people have had experience, a bit of show of hands if you've kind of engaged with that topic before. So I'd be really interested to hear your opinions on that. Some people, you know, kind of tend to think that it's perhaps a little bit extravagant. It takes a lot of time sometimes. It's a moment in time. It doesn't really have a lot of bite in terms of policy or in terms of implementing things on the ground. But also others from the other side, you know, might say that it's actually a really valuable, important moment in time to deliberate, to take time, you know, especially in this era where there's a lot of disinformation, there's a lot of conflict, there's a lot of difficulty in trying to get your message across. So, you know, there's kind of divides around that, and because there's experience in the room, perhaps we can reflect on it in the end. Just to start, I suppose, with some, I think, important baselines. So in the Imagining 2050 project, which is sort of, the findings are available in this EPA report. Back in 2021, it was published. One of the things that we sort of learned by engaging with, you know, in these deliberative processes with communities in Athlone and in Cork were these two core messages. One of them, I think we sort of see this, you know, idea permeating in some of the other presentations, is getting the basics right. And I think some of the letters there are not showing, I don't know why. But yeah, so one of the key messages there in terms of getting the basics right is that people are living multiple crises, and this was back in 2021. The crises have actually escalated. You know, we now have geopolitical crisis as well, and cost of living crisis. You know, back then we were already starting to see grouping up problem with housing, and also political crisis. Less people are voting, less people are politically affiliated, less people are engaging, with policy and these less people are trusting the process in terms of having, elected representatives, political representatives, making the right decisions for them. So there's all of these different crises, and in particular in that loan, this message was that for people to become engaged and to become willing and to become, have dignity in terms of getting involved in energy or climate projects, we absolutely need to get the basics right. Another one, and this came from Cork, was to find, so there's a lot of talks about the energy transition, but a lot of this comes at the national level with very little obvious opportunities sometimes for local people, for people on everyday life to understand what the opportunities are for them. And it's in particular, very tone deaf for some people when you talk about retrofitting homes or, PV installation, if you're in rented accommodation and things like that. It's really tone deaf to start to talk about these opportunities because they're just not available to most people. So, there's a problem in terms of the messaging that we're having. Just in terms of, a critical message there in terms of emotions, and I think that's really important as well. We need to get messages that resonate with people, and we need to do that in an engaging way. And, I think programs like the Creative Climate Action Programme have been very important in doing that. And we've tried to incorporate some of those creative methodologies into our deliberative engagement methods. Just from the climate change in the Irish mind, this one I think was the first phase of the survey that they've done. And in it, you see that 80 to 9% of people that answered the survey felt that the government, local government and businesses should be doing more or a lot more in relation to climate change. So there's, again, this sense of lack of trust and lack of engagement from, your leader to political leaders that should be representing you. On the other hand, I think there's some contradictory messages there in terms of the opinion maps. So the colouring is very small to read, but I think that you can see there in terms of the yellow, you're in the middle range. 50% of people, believe that climate change will harm me personally. So, and in Ireland, people, are half, at least 50% of people that responded to the survey believe that climate change will harm them. That will. Sorry, I'm a bit confused here. So 50%, believe that they'll harm them personally. So other 50% still don't think that climate change is an issue for them personally. When you think about what people think, the climate change is still a thing in the future. So when we get to the purple colors, we're really going into the 90, 100%. And most people believe that climate change will harm future generations. Only, and then how many people are likely to join a campaign for climate action? And now we're in the cold zone, and that's about 20% of people across Ireland, would join a climate action if they're invited. So we're really struggling with certain things. First of all, we still don't think, or some people still don't think climate change is an issue for them personally, maybe for future generations. And they're likely not to join a climate campaign for whatever reason. So in terms of why democratic innovation and futures thinking, I really like this quote from Alvin Toffler, a futurist, that says the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So we're really in this situation where, there's a lot of contradictions and there's a lot of uncertainty in terms of how we're engaging with climate action, how we're engaging with the changing energy system, how we're engaging with the changing political system as well. And we need to be, grounded in this idea that we need to be constantly learning and constantly finding new ways to do what we do. And in terms of the democratic space, I think these premises are important to think through. So technical and democratic innovation should go hand in hand. So no longer should we just focus on the technical fix, just introducing new technologies, that these need to be, part of a wider set of innovations, which include democratic innovations. I think this one is a really important one as well. Disruption in how past futures and present futures are conceived. So the way that in which we saw our life progressing when I was a child, and I thought, I'd have a job for life, I'd have a house, I'd get a car, things like that, is changing very much for people nowadays. All of these sort of life perspectives and life trajectories that were in front of us back in the 80s or back in the 90s are no longer in front of us, or there's a range of uncertainties in front of us, and we need to be able to sort of define a new picture for people to for them to be optimistic and for them to sort of build something around that. And for that you need civic imagination, and again, the fast pace and explosive rate of information exchange is something that's quite problematic as well, and something that we need to deal with, and something that, deliberative democracy can help. So the idea is that what is deliberative democracy? It is a sort of innovation beyond the ballot box. It's beyond, the political representative. You vote and you have somebody there making the decision for you. It's beyond, say, for example, direct democracy as well. So you go and somebody says, yes or no to vote on leaving Europe, Brexit. And you just vote on that, whether you have the right information or not about that. So deliberative democracy is, a space that is based on a couple of principles that tries to address some of the problems that come with representative and direct democracy. It doesn't try to replace it. It's a sort of a complement to it. And I think, in a lot of ongoing innovation, so this is not a static space, there's a lot of ongoing innovations in deliberative democracy space. And one of them is that you need to be connected. Is this idea of a systemic turn in democracy, that everything that you need, everything that you do is connected in some way to other democratic systems, whether that's your local government, that's, a parliament, that's, a range of local groups working together, etc. You need to be connected. You need to find the next step in your process. And that's something that we try to do with this. And, we also, in looking at some of the innovations in our methods, followed 3 core principles. One of them was the principle of reasoned judgment, so that everything and all of the engagements that you have, they need to be very factual, rich, and very informative to people. And for that, you need to know what is it that we need to talk about and who should be in the room to talk about these things, who are the valid experts in the room. So for us, that doesn't just include academics, it might include people, business leaders, local leaders in the community, but also testimonials from real people who have experienced, something around, the team that you're exploring. So that reasoned judgment is really important. The other one is that decisions are made not just for yourself, but they're made for others as well. So you're in a collective decision-making space, and you need to take account of other people's position in that. So there's a lot of ways in which, you're making decisions for others, and if you're making that decision and it's going to heavily impact on your neighbor, you should be able to justify that. You should be able to stand, and provide an explanation as to why that is your position, if you understand, the range of impact it's having on your neighbor. And also, that should be based on equality and inclusion, so that everybody should have a space in the room to participate. So there's a range of ways, citizens' assemblies, citizens' juries, and I have a table there just explaining the differences, the amount of people. One of the differences in terms of methodologies relates to selection methods. Normally you'd go for a random selection, so you have a sort of a microcosm of people in the room that you say, right, this is representative because I didn't just choose who I wanted, you know, I chose a random sample of people, and so this is sort of a real sort of sample of the population that I'm studying. But we actually propose self-selection and targeting, because you can invite people. There's a number of reasons why they might be in the room, or they might not accept your invitation, you know, and you need to understand that, and you need to actively target and support their participation sometimes. So for that reason, we really, highlight the importance of that. And then there's also, the results. What happens when you do these interactive or these deliberative, you come out with a survey, you come out with a report, you come out with a position paper and so on. For us, community reports with detailed proposals and a connection, and that sense of connection to, where you're going after this is relevant. So these are just the tools, that other regarding, we have tools like empathy mapping that are important. You have storyboarding. These are not things that we invented, they're existing, but we think that they're valuable, to bring into the deliberative space to allow for that, So you have your empathy mapping, storyboarding, community mapping, and so on. And I have some examples here. So you all know that, communities, you can find the space for your energy, solar farms, you can find your space for your, your biodiversity, wildlife corridor. Where do you put these? How do you negotiate that with your community? Who should be in the room to ensure that that happens? So, community mapping can be really relevant. Empathy mapping. So, you have a bunch of people and you can consider Alex's life into the future. An 80-year-old, where's she living? What does she need into the future? If we need to make decisions for that particular person, what decisions would we make? This is so relevant to have a bunch of people from all walks of life making decision for an 8-year-old child that's just starting her life, that can be very powerful as well. This one, audience polls, in terms of looking at the future, and it's cutting off the information there. We had a question there in terms of where are you going to, which means of transportation are you using in 2050? And it's really interesting that nearly 50% of people said that they were going to use EVs, which is also cut, it's the one in blue. And only 6% recycling. But actually the question before that, when we asked, how did you get here to this meeting today? About 20% cycled. Nobody had any EVs. So I don't know what happened to the cyclists. They all got into their EVs, So it's interesting to kind of break down what we think the future is going to be. And then when we see this, you say, okay, we have 50% now of people with EVs. What do we need to do to get there by 2050? What's going to happen to our city or our community if we have this? So first looking forward and then, going backwards to break it down is really important. So just going very quickly to touch on Dingle, the European project that we're working on, and then we have another one that's just started in January. In this one, we're looking at data sharing, and I think this is really important because we use the deliberative approach to look at the process of data sharing with the dairy farming community and the sustainable energy and hospitality sector community. And data sharing is really interesting because it's part of everything we do nowadays with energy. When we talk about microgrids, when we talk about smart systems, data is what we're talking about as well. The problem is that, people have concerns about data sharing, and also we haven't quite worked out the value of data sharing for communities. So Eurobarometer information tells us that only 24% of people would be willing to share the data to improve energy efficiencies, whether that's on the grid or, that could be in terms of a small energy community or something like that. There's issues related to trust, and we'll see there's issues related to literacy as well. So we see there just, a comparison that Ireland is not so bad compared to other countries. We're not, but we're still, there's still a long way to go. So the results from the deliberative engagements that we did, and we did some audience polls with the community. We had some expert presentations, and we had a survey in the end where people sort of identified some difficulties. And the information, for some reason, is really not showing there. But in terms of challenges, the top one was digital and energy literacy. So this was a real problem. And it kind of comes full circle in terms of what I was talking about, how we need to learn, relearn. In terms of the energy system, there's so many technologies, there's so many things happening. When we kind of try to tease this out a little bit more, we're not just talking about energy, we're not just talking about even digital literacy, how we use your apps. You're talking about financial literacy, you're talking about civic literacy. So there's a whole breadth of sort of literacies that we need to address when we're thinking about the energy system, when we're thinking about engaging people with the energy system. And I think one of the learnings for us is that energy communities are vital in that respect, because literacy comes as a social practice. We need to be exposed to this. I like the analogy of learning how to ride a bike. If you learn that in the abstract, that's not, it's not really good for you. You learn to ride a bike, and then you have a bike, you have access to it, and you go on your own journeys and you do, what you need to do with your bike. And that's how you learn to ride a bike. So, yeah, I think that's just some resources that we have in terms of all of the stuff that we've done. Thank you. I don't know what happened.
The problem was with us, not with you. So the slides got put into Google Slides from PowerPoint. Sorry. So we've got half an hour, 25 minutes left, so I'm going to suggest we skip the panel discussion. We might have the 4 chairs here and just have a group discussion, a group Q&A, and be more productive. Alex, one thing I just want to say on your slides, you skipped over the toolbox or the toolkit at the end, which I know I presented to multiple governments, including Canada, Italy, the International Renewable Energy Agency. Really take that toolkit that was developed in your work very seriously. I'd recommend anyone who hasn't seen it, especially local communities, to really look at it. Can I get a hand with some chairs and we'll set up the stage? So, Alex, Evan, Dara, I'm going to ask you to join back to us.
Do we have to sit underneath our photo? Or?
Confuse everybody.
Everybody see how much I've aged since I took that one.
So we'll wear these 7 or 8 folks online as well, so we can see you in the room. If you want to put your hand up and ask a question, please do. Thanks for joining us. So I have a list of long questions, but does anybody want to kick off the conversation? Good, got 2, great. Tom.
Thank you all for.
Can you introduce yourself and state where you're from?
I'm Tom Lemesberg. I'm based in the School of Business and Economics here in Cornwall, University of Cornwall. So thanks everybody for a really, really interesting set of talks actually. Yeah, I mean one of the things that popped out for me of all the valuable things you were saying, and I think it spans across a lot of what you're saying, particularly Evan's talk, is that in the Dingle situation you have a cluster of different people with different backgrounds. You have the farmers, you have air grid and so on. And you've got a partnership. Essentially, it's focused around, the whole idea of sustainable development and employment and so on. But underneath that, you're tackling various problems, but you have a process of learning. You have a process of capacity building. And I've looked at a lot of literature, economic literature, and standard literature on exogenous influences of innovation and learning and endogenous influences, and there's massive literature on that. What's really hard to capture, I think, sometimes is, settings like this, where you do have genuine learning going on, but how do you, I hate to use the word measure, how do you track that learning? Because there's information sharing going on in these multiple different networks that are all connected. I think it's very valuable to pull out the learning and see how those networks are generating information sharing dialogue, and how that learning, and it may be very practical, like you're learning to ride a bike example, rather than, the standard measures of human capital, which we use. But there is learning going on there, and there's learning going on in a form of capital, in a way, that's endogenized within that setting. And it may not be applicable to everywhere, but there are genuine lessons learned, and it helps communities tackle the problems and move on and use technologies, use these outside influences in innovative ways. But I think certainly as an academic, I'd be very interested to know how that process takes place. Because I've been working with John quite a lot on looking at how we develop RECs, on tackling a lot of the problems in how communities get finance, how communities just don't keep reinventing the wheel in the way that they deal with these problems. But what's interesting is the sense in which they develop a sense of joint agency, which is essentially what you were capturing there, and how that leads to empowerment. But it's not just within the individual networks of the farmers or the ESB, but there's crossover. And so the networks are enabling capacity building and the learning that addresses those problems, or not, as the case may be, and how it does that.
Thank you, Tom. Do you want to summarise that, or have you looked like you're ready to go?
I might say something.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting in a few ways. The stuff we had done around the learning briefs, for example, were a way to qualitatively track impact. But it was a qualitative measure of impact, and it was always a problem that we didn't have a robust enough mechanism where the reporting procedures were looking for KPIs, So we had to track it through that sort of qualitative approach. But within my own work, as part of it, it was social network analysis, but in the initial stage, a participatory social network analysis, which kind of looked at potential networks to be leveraged, both on the peninsula and externally. So looking at, I think we tracked 17 goals, and then what potential collaborations could be built to achieve those goals, and then we went back at the end to kind of reflect on what has actually happened, But it was, it became an academic exercise rather than of value then there to us. But the learning briefs became the way to try to capture it, but it was a huge problem. I think the piece on learning, we were maybe thinking about impact, but one and not the same often. And there's a colleague of ours now who is doing her PhD on this exact problem, I suppose. Maybe not exact, but on engaged research and impact and measuring impact and kind of evaluating impact and building oftentimes logic models from the very beginning to capture that through the process. And we had done that in workshop settings by at every meeting, fill out your tracker and, try and keep a systematic way, but nothing works perfectly at all in that space. So we definitely had a huge problem with that as well. Thank you.
Just thinking the motivation for your question around measuring impact and world-centered conversation was having Darren a few people about academic rigor and focus on process versus the need for excitement, using Darren's word, and focusing on outcomes. So what are we measuring, and why are we measuring it? Isn't measuring academic successes, or we're measuring successful outcomes, and from whose perspective?
I'd say something about, Evan started the journey in Dingle, and we've been able to continue that on. We have 2 live projects with them at the moment. And I guess the people on the ground are doing fantastic work. They won the Sustainable Places Irish Times Award this year, as well on top of that. And they see that that comes from understanding their level of impact and being able to communicate it. But like Evan said, it's really time consuming to do that. Filling these trackers, even ourselves, we tried to do it because we understood the value from a research perspective, but it's really time consuming and it's really hard to keep up with that because you're doing the work as well on top of that. But as communities grow and as they become more involved, it becomes more important for them to be able to be in that role in terms of monitoring and communicating impact. So it's a struggle, but it's,
Probably boils down to funding as well. Next question.
Hi, my name is Ted Bobo. I'm with newly now, D3 Energy, new company. But a question about the digital twin aggregation models. You mentioned, I think, 600 homes between the 3 islands. I think, Dara, you said something about that at one point in the past, and you said you're looking at a 70-home group for aggregation. I'd like to understand a little bit more about what that aggregation means, and have you done a tipping point analysis where you get to a low enough cost of installed energy that it actually is an immediate savings for the people that are on your grid?
No, so I suppose, I think maybe what's been talked about is the Odeon project, which is the one where we're hoping to extend our existing digital twins. We've built one already in a project with a company called IES, so Integrated Environmental Solutions. Theirs is a physics-based model, but it is just furnished more. So in this project, they're also a partner in Odeon, we want to extend it to cover all 3 islands. And also as part of Odeon, and there are other very academic parts of the project, and there are lots of different use cases and things like that going on as well. We're looking at installing monitoring equipment in up to 70 homes. So there's already some monitoring equipment in some homes, and we're hoping to increase that by another 70. That's the aim. Obviously, recruiting participants into the projects is a lot of work, and there needs to be a what's in it for me, why would they want to do this? And from past projects, it's been really, really important for us to make sure that people have learned an awful lot and have a better understanding of how they're using energy or optimizing the way that they're using the assets that they have, whether it's PV or heat pumps or whatever. But in terms of a tipping point for cost of energy, that is a lot of the work that's happening in Odeon and Dataseller as well. So it's these tools for measuring exactly that. The problem is those costs change all the time. So it's not something that we can just do once. So that's why it's important, I suppose, for us to have a tool to be able to measure that, to see if we're getting to the tipping point or not. And that's what we're hoping to do with these projects.
Thanks, Alan. Okay, we'll just go in order across the arc here.
Colin Garvey from the Clare Energy Agency. A question about the impact of pilot projects. Because I think my understanding is a pilot project, the goal is to find something that everybody else can do afterwards, to find something good in a pilot project. So my question is, what have you found to be things that stop, from the examples of the projects you're doing, what are the kind of obstacles to replication? Just because the goal is you find something good and everybody does it. That's it, So what have you found to be, be it from the academic point of view or from more implementation from the Aran Islands, what have you found to be the obstacles to that?
We can take 2 questions if you want to think about it for a second.
I was trying to answer this. From our perspective, in what we were doing in Dingle, that became the common thing because it was well received and it was on RTE and all this kind of stuff was happening, so it was quite in the public consciousness in Ireland. And everyone would say, oh, how do we do that where we are? Like that was what everyone wanted to know. And it was back to the point I was kind of raising, that it's about embedding the projects in the local. You can't do Dingle in Roscommon because they're not the same. They're not the same place. The vision isn't the same. The starting point isn't the same. So what you focus on will not be the same. But there's still some aspects of how it was done that have been effective. But the huge thing is that it's not supported at a national level, and it's back to the same problems every time. Like currently, how the Dingle project run is 50% commercial services, which would be partnering with research projects and stuff like that, and then having different services on the peninsula, and then 50% philanthropy. So a project that is deemed by policymakers to be so great is often not supported nationally in that way. But I think the replication there's a danger in aiming for replication, and it becomes a numbers game, like the SEC network, where how many things actually lead to impact. We came up with a model, kind of a conceptual model, looking at scaling deep is kind of how we were thinking about it, and this was led by the guys in the Dingle Peninsula. This is the language they use to speak about it from a social entrepreneurship kind of perspective, around thinking about your local assets and basing your approach to sustainability transitions in the local assets of your place. So it's more about a model for replication rather than the project will all look different if you use this conceptual model to start. Does that make sense? It was just a
I suppose what we see in most of the projects that we're involved in, there are pilots in here and in Spain and in France and in Denmark and different countries. And we learn quite a lot from them as well. Some of them are more advanced in some areas than we might be, or there's different societal, I suppose, attitudes toward things. And it's really interesting to see the contrast. And while whatever we're piloting in Aran might not be directly, it might be very island orientated. So like that, it might not apply to Roscommon or to somewhere like that. Generally, there are lots of other lessons within the projects that can be replicated. It's never going to be exactly the same in any two places, because no two places are the same. But we find that the results or the impact of whatever it is that we're trialing, whether it's, say for example, we had a project on smart energy before the feed-in tariffs came in, before people were getting paid for what they're exporting from their PV panels. We had a project looking at maximising people's self-consumption of their panels, so to export as little as possible. Basically, batteries were way more expensive than what they are at the moment. So that was easily replicable because we are on the same national grid as everybody else, even though we're on an island, and those same lessons apply. So there was a huge piece of learning about people who have heat pumps and didn't really understand what the technology was, so they were turning it on and off like they did their boiler, because this idea of having your heat on all of the time, just letting it do its own thing, was really foreign, and nobody had done that kind of education piece on this is the best way for it to run. And that is something that's replicable all over the country. Whenever you bring in a new piece of technology or something new, there's a huge education piece that goes with that. And that goes back again to the language and the way that you communicate things with people. If you start getting really technical about the, efficiency of a heat pump or things like that, people not every single person is going to be able to absorb that and understand it and actually do anything with it. So that was a huge piece that's easily replicable as well. But sometimes there are things that are very nuanced, I suppose, because of where they're being tried. Does that answer?
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, so just something to say before we go to the next question. I'm interested in what the new private wire legislation is going to do to microgrids specifically. I mean, it's been brought about from basically for data centers perspective, but how would it enable community energy? Can you just think about that before we close?
Do you have a question? Sorry, Jane, so Aran and I have to go now when we start home.
Oh, okay.
Or very soon anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. We can leave the stage if you wish. Yeah, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for coming. Thanks for the insights and from the lessons from Aran.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm going to keep you on stage for 5 minutes. Paul and John will have questions.
Yeah, that's good, I think.
I am Phil James. I'm with the Galway Energy Cooperative. Most of what we heard about today is about somewhere else, so the Aran Islands, Cork, or Dingle. But speaking, we're here in Galway City, and I would put forth the point in going out somewhat of a limb here that for there to be community action, there needs to be a sense of community. And I don't think we have a sense of community in Galway City. I think there are neighborhoods maybe that have a sense of community, say the Claddagh or something like that, or Chancellor and all. I say this because we ran a workshop in November where we invited people on the topic of own your own energy to brainstorm about projects that could be done in the community using community resources. And the turnout was okay, but it wasn't great, it was okay. It was somewhere between 30 and 50 people. And those who expressed an interest in participating in some projects that were identified in the workshop, and we had 2 or 3 pages of ideas. Only a few expressed an interest in wanting to work on those projects. So I think there's a lot of disparate and disassociated things going on in Galway. And that's my sense, and it's somewhat contentious, and I think that's what we have to deal with and grapple with here in Galway City, is how do we create this sense of a shared destiny, if you like, shared concerns, and then a shared program of doing something. And that's not an easy, I don't know the answer, and I don't think it's an easy question to answer. I'm not sure that it's a role that the local authority, I know Rebecca's in the county authority, I was thinking of our city local authority, sees itself in that role, as in kind of creating this sense of community. Pauline, I know, was very much associated with the Galway City Council. Maybe you could comment on that actually, Pauline, about that kind of idea of community action requiring a sense of community, and the challenge of creating it here in Galway City. So.
I don't know if the panelists want to discuss it, but I think life has changed. You know, for a lot of people, life is more complex than it used to be 30 years ago. There are multiple things to go to every night, certainly in Galway. And certainly as a councillor, you would have been going to 5 events every night. And so I think there's communities, but I think they look different now than we're used to them looking. And I think it goes back to the point I think that was raised there about meeting people where they are, you know, and looking at your local assets. And you know, you can't speak to dairy farmers if you're not a dairy farmer yourself, and you'll have to find people who can speak to those people and speak with authority. And I think it's. Sorry, I'm just speaking off the top of my head now, but I like the point that you made about it not being about the technology, you know, and I think that's important. So my question is going to be, to what extent do we need to look at what are people's problems first, and engage them in that kind of deliberative democracy, look at what the problems are and then try to solve those, and to what extent is that successful? Is that something that we could be replicating here in Energy West? Look, we all have different hats on. Obviously, I've got a particular energy hat, James has, you know, and so on. But my experience is that people's interest is quite nuanced, even within energy. But it's the people and the communities and what problems they need to be solved.
Do you want to jump in on that from your experiences?
I just had a small one on the first point. I don't know Galway at all. I think this is the 3rd time I've been here my whole life. But the current work we're doing is kind of more at the city level in Cork, and then you start to get into similar problems. Dingle is clear, you're on the peninsula, you're in Dingle geographically, it's a place. But even at that, we weren't working with Dingle as a community. You know, our approach was to work with the willing. That's what we always said, and let people emerge who want to work with us, and then it'll build. Everyone who works with us has brothers and sisters and wives and husbands and children, and then over time it becomes something more or it gets bigger. So that was our approach. But just on the point that starting not from technologies, I don't know if you'd ever talked to Conor about this before, but when as part of Conor Gucan, as part of Dingle Peninsula 2030, he was doing some energy systems modeling, and he wanted to build in like community input into the models. So he went there to the 8 parishes of the Dingle Peninsula And this was only possible because of the support of NewKid, the local community development organisation. They helped, they got the communities to come together, come to the town hall on Tuesday, and we're going to have this meeting about the energy system. And he went to all of them, and it was a disaster. Like, nobody wanted to talk about energy. They were all like, what the hell? And he was lucky, again, he was lucky because NewKid were there, and they're the community development partner, and they have a lot of trust in it. Like, okay, we're going to do this again in 2 weeks' time. And he went back, and this time was just what way do you want to develop the area? And everything could be reverse engineered to have a value by looking for grants on retrofitting or looking for grants on solar. Like, there was always a way to meet the needs of the local area through potential projects in the energy space. Now, whether they were all actualized or not is a different thing, but things could start to move forward by reverse engineering it that way. And he was just lucky that he had 2 chances to do it, like, because normally that'd be it. It'll be over, you know? So that was his experience on it.
Follow up on that then, Evan, I mean, the 2 things from the Dingle experience that would be nice to know, the Galway experience. You mentioned the diffusion model, and then I think you also mentioned Dinny, the AI farmer, and how his relationships diffused what you were doing in connecting more groups and people together. So back to Pauline's question, there's increasing number of groups that I'm aware of, groups that I'm not aware of, not that my awareness matters. But what role did you play in regards coordination and enabling, like bringing this back to Energy? So we don't see ourselves as directly doing anything. It's trying to catalyze other groups to achieve their goals. So that, yeah, did you see any sort of like role for coordination of the process within that diffusion that you saw in Dingle?
To be honest, not really. Like, the idea was to bring together the group, start working on active initiatives and projects, help set up the sustainable energy community, so that existed, and then there's the energy master plan. The stuff that ESP doing was very visible. We were doing stuff in the schools. We were doing a number of things early that were kind of just visible, and it was like, oh, there's something going on out of this building, very similar to this, smaller but similar sort of idea. And then it was just to let things kind of emerge and then facilitate that, you know? So, and the Dingle Hub, that was their role, that facilitation role, because they were the locally based. That might be your role though, in that you'd organize a meeting on a specific topic and you'd invite the right people and see how it comes about. So, you know, there was the ability to bring people down, you know, someone from SEI might come down to have a look at something, and all of a sudden someone from tourism and hospitality would be in the room, and, you know, to kind of manage the situations, but let things emerge. Like, there was a facilitation role, but it's not the same as project management. Things were allowed kind of then go off in their own directions, but networking, almost you call it, putting people in touch with the right people, you know.
Yeah.
But it was an active role of the hub, but not as us as academics. It wasn't our role.
Just so the final point I want to come back to is Pauline's about not technology. When you were doing the first kind of experimental workshops in Ballincollig and Athlone and envisioning the process we were coming from was the energy transition visioning, but what came out of it, from what I remember, was more about health and hospitals and well-being long before we started talking about energy technologies. Can you comment a little bit on that from your thoughts on that regards in the context of Pauline's question before technology?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so, you know, we had to sort of break down the vision, you know, and for Athlone, I remember it was so important for people to consider health, to consider climate resilience, to consider transport as well, was another one. For Ballincollig, it was a community outside Cork City, and I think it maybe has some sort of parallels with Dewishka in Galway. Went from being 50 people, you know, some farmland, to now being 20,000 and growing. So, you know, there's a lot of sort of pressure, I suppose. You know, it's a growing population. It's a sometimes transient population as well. It's not very cohesive. You know, there's a lot of community development that needs to occur. So all of these things are really important for the community, and we needed to sort of find out what normally, you know, people call the co-benefits of climate action in these actions. But just to go back in terms of, developing energy communities as well, I think from Dingle, one of the things that was seen as well is the value of the sectoral approach. Dairy farmer community was a really was a real success. And from that, you're able to sort of short circuit that into the tourism and hospitality sector. And there's more communities now building on the success of that, on the exposure of that. And I think from a city perspective, we see, for example, local GAA, there's a lot of support in terms of greening that space, and energy could definitely be one of those. So I think that the sectoral approach to energy community could have a lot of value. Also engaging with communities from other countries, in Portugal, for example. A lot of lessons in terms of when there's a lack of cohesion in communities, energy, like food, can be a thing that brings people together. So it could be a slow starter, a slow burner, but it could definitely be something that where there's no cohesion. And I definitely think that there is a lot of, I'm thinking, in terms of sectors, the arts sector, and art and climate action, it is something that, there's a lot of funding in terms of, national funding trickling down projects and so on. So, that could be another opportunity, because going in the arts is something that's, something to build on.
James, can I make just one last point? It's quite around the question, really. But I think it might be important for Energy West as well. And that is this, it ties in, I actually asked this to Darren, because it ties in with the point you made about lobbying at the beginning. But when I look at the whole sort of policy setup that's been developed over the last 10 or 15 years, targeted at RECs and SECs, it's very unhelpful, it's inconsistent, and it's a lot of SECs and RECs are going to make sure like really an uphill struggle to really make progress with that supportive policy. When I compare that with Wind Energy Ireland or the storage, talking to people like Bobby Smith, they are experts at the lobbying process. They almost tell the government what to do. They're very sophisticated at it. And if you look at feed-in tariffs and all the standard green industrial policies, they're very effective, and they're used very effectively. But there's a sense in which, not only here, but also in Britain, the SEC networks and the REC networks operate in the separate network groups. They don't cross over with Irish Wind Farm, Wind Energy Ireland, or these powerful lobby groups. But no one knows the problems and the challenges and the policy needs more than these SEC, REC networks. My question is, to what extent that lobbying piece that Dara talked about, is absolutely critically important to get that voice across, but to get it across in a very consistent way, and do it in a way that's tied in with the other SECs and RECs across the country, so it is cohesive. But there needs to be cross-fertilization with the more mainstream technologies, particularly where if you want to develop energy in the West, it's not just about the community space. It's about big wind, it's about floating offshore. These technologies can have a huge difference. Look at the way the UK developed its offshore development industries. That wasn't just around community issues. So, yeah, that lobbying piece and getting that policy framework is absolutely critical. So, anyway, I don't expect an answer for that, but
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and I think that's kind of what we're grappling with in the last 9 months with Energy West. Is that space between the local SECs and national funding and European funding, and I don't like the word lobbying, but catalysing. And this event has been on local communities, but we are looking at industry, finance, capital, venture capital, the whole suite of elements that need to be tackled to do an energy transition right and fast. So I agree. Well, let's go off the stage. Thank you very much for your time. So we're just a small bit over time. I'm going to take about 30 seconds. So we're going to take a break for a month. We'll probably be back in late April. and people are reading. Thanks for everybody in the room. There are books and a recent talk from a professor at entrepreneur in residence from MIT on the entrepreneurship of the energy transition. We're halfway through it. It's really excellent reading. Thanks to John Bersman and to the author Ben Skilhoff, who's one for everybody in the audience. Thanks very much. I'll see you next time.